Commander Jake Morrison looked out the window of the UES Guardian as they moved through space. The stars looked different here, far from Earth, and deeper into the galaxy than any human had ever traveled before. His ship was the first one humanity had built that could travel this far from home. It had taken them 50 years to build the technology needed to reach this place. Jake turned to look at his crew working at their stations. Captain Lisa Hayes stood next to him, watching the strange readings on her instruments. The ship's computers were picking up signals they had never seen before. Dr. Alan Carter sat at his science station, trying to understand what the sensors were telling them. These signals came from machines and ships that were far more advanced than anything humans had ever built. The Guardian had been traveling for 6 months to reach this part of space. Earth scientists had picked up radio signals coming from this direction. The signals were clearly made by intelligent beings, not natural space phenomena. This was the proof that humanity had been searching for. They were not alone in the universe. Other intelligent life existed among the stars. Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez worked at the communications station. He had been trying to decode the alien signals for weeks. The patterns were complex and unlike anything in human language or mathematics. Some signals seemed to be conversations between different groups. Others appeared to be commands or instructions. A few seemed to be warnings about something dangerous. The first sign that they were not welcome came when strange ships appeared around the Guardian. These vessels looked nothing like human designs. Some were made of what appeared to be living crystal that pulsed with internal light. Others were perfect geometric shapes that moved without any visible engines. A few seemed to be made of pure energy, shifting and changing form as they moved through space. Jake ordered his crew to prepare for first contact. They had practiced this moment hundreds of times during their journey. Humanity had dreamed of meeting other intelligent species for centuries. They had hoped these aliens would welcome them as friends and share knowledge that would help both civilizations grow stronger together. The alien ships moved closer to the Guardian. They formed a perfect circle around the human vessel, blocking any path of escape. Their movements were precise and coordinated in a way that suggested they had done this many times before. These aliens were clearly experienced at encountering new species in their territory. A bright light filled the Guardian's bridge. When the light faded, a tall figure stood in front of Jake and his crew. The being looked like it was made of the same crystal as some of the ships outside. It stood nearly 8 feet tall and its body pulsed with colors that seemed to shift based on its thoughts or emotions. Its voice came directly into their minds without using sound. The crystal being identified itself as Overseer Kessetai of the Zephyrian people. It explained that Jake's ship had entered space controlled by the Dominion Council. This council was made up of 12 different alien species that ruled this part of the galaxy. They had been in control for thousands of years and maintained order among all the civilizations in their territory. Kessetai told them that humanity had been watched and studied for some time. The council knew about Earth and its people. They had observed human history, technology, and behavior. Based on their observations, humanity had been classified as a Class C species. This classification meant that humans were considered too primitive and dangerous to join galactic civilization. The Overseer explained that the galaxy was divided into different zones based on how advanced and stable each species was. Class A species like the Zephyrians were the rulers and decision-makers. Class B species were allowed to travel freely and participate in trade and diplomacy. Class C species like humans were restricted to their home systems and forbidden from accessing advanced technologies. Jake tried to argue that humanity deserved a chance to prove themselves. He explained that humans had achieved spaceflight, developed advanced computers, and learned to work together to solve global problems. They had explored their solar system and were ready to take their place among the stars alongside other intelligent beings. Kessetai's crystal body flashed with what might have been amusement. It told Jake that many species had made similar claims when they first encountered the Council. The Overseer explained that advancement was not measured by simple technology or exploration. True civilization required emotional control, logical thinking, and the ability to follow established rules without question. The Council had studied humanity for decades. They had watched humans fight wars over resources, beliefs, and territory. They had observed how humans made decisions based on emotions rather than logic. They had seen how unpredictable and violent humans could be when faced with challenges or threats to their way of life. Dr. Carter asked what humanity would need to do to prove they deserved a higher classification. Kesthai explained that the Council's decision was final. Humans were too emotional, too unpredictable, and too aggressive to ever be trusted with advanced technology or access to other civilizations. Their biological nature made them fundamentally unsuitable for peaceful coexistence with other species. The Overseer described the other species in the Council. The Titans were beings of living stone who had never lost a battle in 10,000 years. The Nexus were artificial intelligences that could process information faster than any biological brain. The Ethereals were beings of pure energy who communicated through thought alone. Each species had evolved beyond what the Council considered primitive biological limitations. Lisa Hayes asked what would happen if humanity refused to accept this classification. Kesethai's crystal form grew brighter as it explained that the Council had dealt with rebellious species before. Those who refused to accept their place in the galactic order were eliminated completely. Their worlds were sterilized, and their civilizations erased from history. Sam Rodriguez had been quietly recording everything the Overseer said. He asked if humanity could at least maintain contact with Earth to warn them of the Council's decision. Kesthai agreed that one message would be permitted before the Guardian was escorted back to human space. After that, any human vessel found outside their solar system would be destroyed without warning. The crystal being began to fade from the bridge as its projection ended. Before it disappeared completely, Kesethai delivered one final message. Humanity had one standard galactic year to withdraw all their exploration vessels and installations back to Earth's solar system. Any humans found beyond that boundary after the deadline would be considered hostile invaders and eliminated. Jake stared at the empty space where the Overseer had stood. Around them, the alien ships maintained their positions, waiting to escort the Guardian back toward Earth. Humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had ended before it truly began. They were alone among the stars, surrounded by powers beyond their understanding, and classified as too primitive to ever join the greater community of intelligent life. 3 months had passed since the Guardian returned to Earth with news of the Dominion Council. Humanity struggled to accept that they were considered too primitive to join galactic civilization. Earth's leaders debated whether to accept their restricted status or find ways to prove the aliens wrong about human potential. The answer came from deep space in the form of desperate alien transmissions that Earth's listening posts intercepted by accident. The signals spoke of something called the Devourers, ancient machines that had awakened from their sleep in the center of the galaxy. These mechanical beings were consuming entire star systems and growing stronger with each world they destroyed. Engineer Ben Foster worked in the orbital shipyards above Earth, analyzing the fragments of alien communications that had reached human space. The translations were incomplete, but the panic in the alien voices was clear. Civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years were fleeing their homeworlds in terror. The first clear picture of the crisis came from a damaged alien vessel that appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system. The ship belonged to a species called the Architects, beings who could reshape matter with their thoughts. Their vessel was barely functional, its advanced hull scarred by weapons that seemed to eat through metal and energy alike. Dr. Rachel Kim led the team that boarded the alien ship. Inside, they found the Architect survivors in a state of shock. These beings had never known defeat in their millions of years of existence. They had built worlds and moved stars with their technology. Yet something had driven them from their home galaxy, leaving them broken and afraid. The Architect leader, a being that looked like flowing liquid metal, explained the nature of the Devourers through a translation device. These machines had been built by a civilization so ancient that even the Council's oldest records contained no memory of them. They had been designed to consume and process all matter in the universe, converting it into more of themselves. For over 1 million years, the Devourers had been dormant, sleeping in massive structures hidden in the galactic core. Something had awakened them recently, and they had begun their expansion outward. Every world they touched was stripped down to its basic atoms and rebuilt into more Devourer units. The liquid metal being showed them recordings of the first battles between the Devourers and Council forces. Jake Morrison watched in horror as fleets of alien warships were systematically destroyed by the mechanical invaders. The Devourers learned from every attack, adapted to every strategy, and grew stronger with each victory. Council Fleet Admiral Zethkar of the Titans had led the largest military force in galactic history against the Devourers. His stone warriors had never retreated from any battle in 10,000 years. The recordings showed his massive fleet being torn apart by machines that seemed to anticipate their every move. The synthetic nexus had tried to outcompute the Devourers, using their advanced artificial intelligence systems. Within hours, the Devourers had not only matched their processing power, but exceeded it. They turned the Nexus's own technology against them, causing their battle computers to crash and their ships to become helpless. Even the ethereals, beings of pure energy who existed outside normal space and time, found themselves outmatched by the ancient machines. The Devourers developed new weapons that could harm energy beings, forcing creatures that had never known physical vulnerability to flee for their existence. Dr. Carter studied the tactical data from dozens of failed battles. Every major galactic power had tried their best strategies against the Devourers. The Hive Collective had sent billions of warriors in coordinated swarm attacks. The Zephyrians had used their telepathic abilities to coordinate perfect battle formations. The Titans had relied on their unstoppable physical strength. In every case, the result was the same. The Devourers analyzed their enemies, learned their patterns, and developed counters that made resistance impossible. They seemed to possess infinite adaptive capability and unlimited learning potential. No strategy worked twice, and every tactic only made them stronger. The crisis reached its peak when the Devourers began consuming the Council's most important worlds. The Zephyrian crystal cities were reduced to component atoms. The Nexus processing centers were converted into Devourer manufacturing facilities. Entire star systems that had been inhabited for millions of years became empty space in a matter of days. Refugees flooded into the remaining safe systems, overwhelming the Council's ability to provide shelter and resources. Ancient civilizations that had never known fear were paralyzed by panic. Species that had ruled the galaxy found themselves reduced to homeless wanderers, fleeing an enemy they could not understand or defeat. It was during this chaos that Overseer Kessetai appeared, once again in Earth's solar system. This time, the Zephyrian's crystal form looked dimmer, its colors muted by desperation and exhaustion. The being that had dismissed humanity as primitive now came to them asking for help. Jake Morrison, now promoted to Admiral of Earth's small defense fleet, met with the Overseer aboard the rebuilt Guardian. Kessetai explained that the Council had exhausted all conventional options. Every species had contributed their best technology, their strongest warriors, and their most brilliant strategies. Nothing had worked against the Devourers. The Zephyrian admitted that the Council had been wrong about many things. Their classification system was based on traditional measures of advancement, like technology, logic, and predictable behavior. The Devourers had proven that these qualities could be weaknesses when facing an enemy that learned from them. Ben Foster listened as Kessetai described the Council's desperate offer. If humanity could find a way to stop the Devourers, they would be granted full membership in galactic civilization. They would receive access to all advanced technologies, territorial rights throughout the galaxy, and a voice in the Council's decisions. Dr. Kim asked why the Council thought humans might succeed where 12 superior civilizations had failed. Kessetai's crystal form flickered with uncertainty, as it explained that human unpredictability might be exactly what was needed. The Devourers had learned to counter logic, but perhaps they could not adapt to something that made no logical sense. The Overseer showed them recent battle data where even the most random strategies had failed. The Council had tried sending ships with no battle plan, making decisions through random number generators, and deliberately acting against their own interests. The Devourers had somehow learned to predict even unpredictable behavior. Admiral Morrison studied the data and realized that the aliens' idea of unpredictable behavior was still based on logical systems. Their random strategies were generated by computers and mathematical formulas. Even their most chaotic actions followed patterns that a sufficiently advanced intelligence could eventually decode and counter. Lisa Hayes, now captain of the Guardian, pointed out that humans did not make decisions the way aliens did. Human choices were influenced by emotions, instincts, personal experiences, and cultural factors that no computer could fully model. Human unpredictability came from consciousness itself, not from mathematical randomness. Sam Rodriguez had been analyzing devourer communication patterns during the meeting. He noticed that the machines seemed to pause whenever they encountered something they could not immediately categorize or understand. These hesitations were brief, but they represented the only moments when the devourers showed any sign of vulnerability. Dr. Carter proposed an expedition to study the devourers directly rather than relying on second-hand reports from panicked aliens. If humanity was going to develop a strategy to fight these machines, they needed to understand how the devourers actually functioned and what their limitations might be. Kesethai warned that approaching the devourers was considered suicide. By every council military advisor, no ship that had gotten close to their formations had ever returned with data. The machines destroyed everything that came within range of their sensors, leaving no witnesses to report on their capabilities or weaknesses. Jake Morrison made the decision that would change the course of the war. He agreed to lead a joint human-alien task force against the Devourers, but under human command and using human tactics. If the Council wanted humanity's help, they would have to trust human judgment, even when it made no logical sense to them. The Overseer accepted these terms with visible reluctance. The Crystal being admitted that giving primitive humans command of advanced alien technology went against every Council protocol and safety regulation. However, with their civilization facing complete extinction, they had no choice but to try something completely different from everything that had already failed. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's first ship built with alien technology. The vessel combined human engineering with the advanced materials and power systems provided by the Dominion Council. It looked strange to human eyes, but it represented the best chance anyone had against the Devourers. His crew was unlike anything that had ever existed before. Humans worked alongside beings they had only recently learned existed. Zephyrian tactical officers provided their crystal-based computing power, while human navigators relied on instinct and experience. Nexus analytical units processed data faster than any human brain could, while human engineers solved problems through trial and error. Captain Lisa Hayes coordinated between the different species, translating not just languages, but entire ways of thinking. The aliens approached every problem through logic and established procedures. Humans relied on intuition, emotion, and the willingness to try things that might not work. These different approaches often led to confusion and conflict among the crew. Dr. Alan Carter studied the Devourer technology samples that had been recovered from previous battles. The alien scientists had spent months analyzing the materials, using every advanced technique in their databases. They had determined the exact molecular structure, energy patterns, and manufacturing processes used by the ancient machines. None of this analysis had helped them understand how to fight the Devourers effectively. The machines adapted to every weapon that was developed based on their known properties. They seemed to evolve faster than the Council could create new strategies or technologies to counter them. Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez worked with the ethereal communication specialist to monitor Devourer transmissions. The energy beings could perceive frequencies and patterns that were invisible to biological senses. They had decoded much of the machine language and could predict where the Devourers would strike next. Yet this knowledge had not prevented any attacks or saved any worlds. The Devourers seemed to know that their communications were being monitored. They had begun sending false information and decoy signals to confuse their enemies, while their real forces attacked elsewhere. The first test of human leadership came at the Kepler system, where a small Devourer scout force was consuming an abandoned mining colony. The alien crew members expected Jake to follow established military doctrine. They had detailed battle plans based on successful tactics used against other enemies throughout galactic history. Instead, Jake ordered the ship to approach the Devourers using a flight path that made no tactical sense. They flew directly toward the enemy's strongest position while broadcasting human music on all frequencies. The alien crew members protested that this approach violated every principle of space combat and would result in their immediate destruction. The Devourers paused their consumption of the colony to analyze this unexpected behavior. Their massive, mechanical forms hung motionless in space while they processed the implications of an enemy that seemed to be deliberately making itself vulnerable to attack. For the first time in recorded history, the machines hesitated instead of immediately destroying an approaching vessel. Sergeant Maria Santos took advantage of this confusion to launch the ship's fighters in a pattern that defied all military logic. Instead of coordinating their attack or focusing on strategic targets, each pilot was told to act independently and ignore what the others were doing. The result looked like chaos to both human and alien observers. The Devourer combat systems, designed to predict and counter organized resistance, found themselves unable to process the random actions of the human pilots. Every time they calculated an optimal response to one fighter's movements, another pilot would do something completely different that required a new set of calculations. Lieutenant Pete Johnson led his squadron in what he called a stupid charge, directly into the heart of the Devourer formation. His attack had no strategic objective other than to cause confusion and see what would happen. The alien crew members watched in horror as the human fighters flew straight into what should have been a death trap. Instead of being destroyed, the human pilots found gaps in the Devourer defenses that no computer had predicted would exist. The machines had been programmed to respond to logical threats, not to fighters that seemed to be randomly flying around without any plan or purpose. Corporal Amy Wright discovered that her damaged fighter could still function even though its systems were completely offline according to alien technical manuals. She continued attacking using manual controls and visual targeting, while her ship's computer insisted that flight was impossible under current conditions. Chief Engineer Carol Blake watched from the Defiance as the human fighters achieved something that 12 advanced civilizations had failed to accomplish. They were actually damaging Devourer units and forcing the machines to retreat. The ancient technology that had seemed invincible was struggling to cope with human unpredictability. The battle lasted for 6 hours, far longer than any previous engagement with the Devourers. Usually, the machines would analyze their enemies and develop perfect counters within minutes. Against human tactics, they seemed to be constantly recalculating and adjusting their responses without ever finding a stable solution. Dr. Carter monitored the Devourer communication frequencies during the fight. The machine language showed patterns he had never seen before. The Devourers were requesting additional processing power from their network to handle the complex calculations required to predict human behavior. The alien crew members began to understand what was happening as they watched the battle unfold. The Zephyrians had always believed that perfect logic and emotional control were signs of advanced evolution. The Nexus had assumed that faster processing and more data would always lead to better decisions. Humans operated on completely different principles. Their decisions were influenced by personal experiences, cultural backgrounds, emotional states, and subconscious instincts that could not be easily quantified or predicted. Even humans themselves often could not explain why they made certain choices in combat situations. When Sergeant Santos ordered her fighters to withdraw, she did not follow any established retreat procedure. Some pilots returned to the Defiance immediately while others continued attacking individual targets. A few fighters began rescuing survivors from the mining colony, even though this had not been part of their mission. The Devourers found themselves unable to determine whether the humans were retreating, regrouping, or implementing some complex strategy they had not encountered before. Their response systems became increasingly confused as they tried to prepare for multiple contradictory possibilities simultaneously. The final surprise came when Lieutenant Johnson's damaged fighter exploded near a group of Devourer units. The alien tactical computers had calculated that the explosion would cause minimal damage and achieve no strategic objectives. They classified it as an accident or equipment failure rather than a deliberate attack. However, the explosion created an electromagnetic pulse that disrupted Devourer communications in that sector. This interference spread through their network, causing temporary confusion among units throughout the system. The machines had not anticipated that humans might use their own equipment failures as weapons. As the human forces withdrew from the Kepler system, they left behind something unprecedented. In Devourer history, several machine units remained inactive, their processing systems overwhelmed by the task of trying to understand and counter human behavior patterns that seemed to follow no logical rules. Admiral Morrison reviewed the battle data with his mixed crew as they traveled to their next engagement. The aliens were beginning to realize that their definition of intelligence and advancement might have been too narrow. Logic and predictability were valuable tools, but they could also become limitations when facing an enemy designed to exploit them. Captain Hayes noted that the humans had not won the battle through superior technology or tactical brilliance. They had succeeded by being genuinely unpredictable in ways that their own advanced computers could not simulate, or their enemies anticipate. The Devourers had been built to counter every form of organized resistance they might encounter. Their creators had never imagined they might face opponents who could be effective without being logical, successful without being predictable, and dangerous precisely because they often made no sense. The siege of New Geneva had lasted for 3 weeks when Commander Jack Turner arrived with his small fleet of human vessels. The colony world held 2 million refugees from 12 different species, all trapped behind a devourer blockade that the Council's best strategists declared mathematically unbreakable. The ancient machines had surrounded the planet with a perfect sphere of interconnected units. Every possible escape route had been calculated and blocked. Supply ships could not reach the surface, and evacuation vessels could not break through the formation. The Devourers had created what their tactical systems considered a flawless siege. Jack studied the enemy positions from his command ship, the UES Stubborn. His fleet consisted of only 6 vessels, all of them older human designs that had been hastily upgraded with alien technology. According to every military simulation run by Council computers, his force had 0 chance of breaking through the blockade. The alien refugees on New Geneva had been sending increasingly desperate messages as their supplies ran low. The Zephyrian administrators calculated that they had perhaps 10 days before critical shortages would force them to surrender to the Devourers. The Nexus units had already begun negotiating terms for an orderly submission that might preserve some lives. Dr. Susan Price worked in the colony's science station, monitoring the Devourer network communications. She had been documenting what she called the human determination coefficient in her research reports. When humans faced impossible odds, their behavior patterns changed in ways that defied mathematical modeling. Unlike other species that would calculate their chances and make rational decisions based on probability, humans seemed to simply ignore unfavorable odds entirely. They would continue fighting long after logic dictated that resistance was futile. This stubborn refusal to accept defeat had puzzled alien observers for months. Jack Turner embodied this human trait perfectly. When his tactical computer showed him the siege formation and calculated his chances of success at less than 1%, he simply turned off the computer and began planning his attack based on intuition and experience, instead of mathematical analysis. His first move violated every principle of space warfare that the galaxy had developed over millions of years. Instead of probing for weaknesses in the Devourer formation, he ordered his entire fleet to attack the strongest point in the blockade. His ships flew directly toward the heaviest concentration of enemy units. The Devourers had prepared for every logical approach to breaking their siege. They had counters ready for flanking maneuvers, diversionary tactics, stealth approaches, and coordinated assaults. They had not prepared for an enemy that would simply fly straight at their most heavily defended position and start shooting. Captain Linda Ross commanded the UES Relentless, one of Jack's escort ships. When she received his attack order, she knew it was tactically insane. Her ship would be destroyed within minutes if she followed his instructions. She did it anyway, because that was what humans did when their commander gave them an impossible mission. The Devourer combat systems paused for several seconds as they tried to process this unexpected development. Their tactical networks had to recalculate their entire defensive strategy to account for attackers who seemed to be deliberately choosing the worst possible approach to the battle. Lieutenant Mark Davis flew his fighter directly into the gap created by the UES Relentless's suicidal charge. His small craft should have been vaporized instantly by the concentrated firepower of dozens of Devourer units. Instead, he found himself flying through a corridor of confused machines that were still trying to understand why anyone would attack in such an illogical manner. The breakthrough came when Private Danny Cole, piloting a damaged transport with no weapons and failing life support, decided to ram his ship directly into a Devourer command vessel. His craft had no shields, no armor, and no chance of causing significant damage to the massive machine. According to every law of physics and military tactics, Danny's sacrifice should have been meaningless. His small transport could not possibly harm a Devourer capital ship that was designed to withstand the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. The impact should have resulted in nothing more than a brief flash of light. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The collision created a resonance cascade in the Devourer's neural network that spread to other units connected to the same command structure. The machines had been designed to share information and coordinate their actions through quantum entanglement links. When Danny's transport struck the command vessel, his ship's reactor containment failed in a pattern that the Devourers had never encountered before. The explosion was not particularly powerful, but it occurred at exactly the moment when the machine was trying to process the concept of a being choosing certain death over surrender. The resulting computational paradox spread through the Devourer network like a virus. These machines had been built to understand and counter every possible threat, but they had never been programmed to deal with the idea of truly meaningless sacrifice. Their logic systems simply could not process the concept of an action that served no strategic purpose. Dr. Price monitored the cascade as it spread through the siege formation. Devourer units began shutting down their non-essential systems as they devoted more processing power to understanding what had just happened. Their perfect coordination started to break down as individual machines struggled with concepts their creators had never anticipated. Jack Turner saw the confusion spreading through the enemy formation and immediately ordered his remaining ships to exploit the gap. He did not understand what had caused the Devourers to falter, but he recognized an opportunity when he saw one. His fleet pushed through the weakened section of the blockade. The evacuation ships that had been waiting behind the planet's moon suddenly found themselves with a clear path to the surface. Captain Sarah Mitchell led the first convoy through the gap, her transport loaded with medical supplies and emergency equipment. She knew the window might close at any moment, but she was determined to save as many lives as possible. The Devourers tried to re-establish their siege formation, but the cascade effect continued to spread through their network. Units that had been perfectly coordinated for weeks began operating independently, each machine trying to solve the paradox on its own, without sharing data with the others. Sergeant Kevin Brown commanded the ground defense forces on New Geneva's surface. When he saw the first evacuation ships breaking through the blockade, he organized the refugees into groups that could be transported quickly. The alien survivors had given up hope days ago, but the humans refused to stop trying to save them. The rescue operation continued for 18 hours as human ships ferried refugees from the planet's surface to safety beyond the Devourer formation. The ancient machines watched this evacuation happen but seemed unable to coordinate an effective response to stop it. Admiral Morrison arrived with reinforcements just as the last transport cleared the planet's atmosphere. His larger fleet could have easily destroyed the confused Devourer units, but Jack Turner advised against it. The machines were studying the cascade effect, and a direct attack might help them understand how to prevent it from happening again. Instead, the human forces withdrew with their rescued refugees, leaving the Devourers to struggle with concepts that their programming could not process. For the first time in their million-year history, the ancient machines had encountered something that made them doubt the logical foundations of their existence. The siege of New Geneva became the turning point in the war against the Devourers. Not because humanity had developed superior weapons or tactics, but because they had demonstrated something the machines could not understand or counter. They had shown that some things in the universe were worth dying for, even when logic said that death would accomplish nothing. Dr. Price's research data would later become the foundation for understanding how human determination could disrupt machine intelligence. The Devourers had been built to analyze and counter every possible threat, but they had never been designed to comprehend the concept of hope in the face of certain defeat. The final battle began when billions of Devourer units converged on Earth's solar system. Every machine the ancient race had built over the past year was moving toward humanity's homeworld. The sight filled the screens of every observatory and space station, a tide of mechanical death that stretched across the void like a metal sea. Admiral Kate Robinson commanded the largest space defense fleet in human history from the bridge of the UES Indomitable. Ships from every major alien species had come to Earth's defense, their crews finally understanding that if humanity fell, the galaxy would follow. The combined fleet represented the last hope of all intelligent life. The alien vessels brought with them the most advanced weapons and defenses their civilizations had ever created. Zephirian crystal ships could channel pure energy across vast distances. Nexus battle platforms processed targeting data faster than light itself. Ethereal vessels existed partially outside normal space, making them nearly impossible to hit with conventional weapons. Yet everyone knew that traditional tactics would not work against the Devourers. The ancient machines had learned to counter every alien technology and strategy. They had adapted to every weapon system and defense mechanism that the galaxy had developed over millions of years of warfare. Kate's strategy made no sense to the alien tactical computers that tried to analyze her battle plan. She deliberately positioned her strongest ships in locations where they would be vulnerable to attack. She sent her most experienced crews on missions that seemed to have no strategic value. Her deployment patterns looked random to observers who expected logical military formations. The Devourers approached Earth in perfect geometric formations, their movements calculated to maximize efficiency and minimize losses. They had analyzed every previous battle and developed optimal strategies for destroying the defending fleet with minimal expenditure of resources. Their victory seemed mathematically certain. Lieutenant Rick Hayes prepared his boarding team for what he called the dumbest mission in military history. His orders were to capture a Devourer construction ship, not for its technology or intelligence value, but simply because Kate wanted to punch these robots in their stupid metal faces. The mission had no tactical objective and no chance of success. Rick's team consisted of volunteers who understood they were probably going to die for no good reason. Marine Corporal Jim Parker checked his equipment one final time, knowing that his weapons could barely scratch Devourer armor. Sergeant Nancy Williams ran through the boarding procedures, even though no one had ever successfully captured one of the ancient machines. The battle began with the aliens trying to implement coordinated strategies that had been successful against other enemies. The Titan battleships formed massive walls of living stone, their crews confident that nothing could break through their ancient defenses. The Hive Collective launched swarms of fighters in perfect mathematical formations. Within minutes, the Devourers had analyzed and countered every alien tactic. The crystal ships found their energy weapons absorbed and redirected back at them. The battle platforms discovered their processing systems hacked and turned against their own fleets. The geometric formations that had worked for millions of years became death traps. Then the human ships began their chaotic assault. Captain Tom Brady led his squadron in a spiraling attack pattern that followed no mathematical formula. Commander Lisa Ford ordered her fighters to ignore their assigned targets and engage whatever enemy units looked interesting. The result was battlefield chaos that no computer could predict or model. The Devourer formation began to develop gaps as individual machines struggled to respond to human unpredictability. Their perfect coordination started to break down when they could not predict where the next attack would come from or what form it would take. Private Joe Simpson's fighter lost all its weapons and most of its engine power during the first wave of attacks. Instead of returning to his carrier or ejecting from his damaged craft, he decided to use his ship as a battering ram. He flew directly into a group of Devourer escort units, causing an explosion that damaged 3 enemy machines. The ancient robots paused to analyze this action, trying to understand why any pilot would choose to destroy his own ship for minimal tactical gain. While they were distracted by this calculation, human bombers slipped through their defenses and struck at more valuable targets. Dr. Jennifer Walsh monitored the battle from Earth's orbital command center. Her instruments detected something unprecedented happening in the Devourer communication network. The machines were devoting increasing amounts of processing power to understanding human behavior, leaving less capacity for combat operations. Rick Hayes and his boarding team somehow managed to reach their target, a massive Devourer construction vessel that was building new units even during the battle. Their small transport should have been destroyed long before reaching the enemy ship, but the Devourers were too confused by other human actions to notice one more illogical maneuver. The boarding action violated every rule of space combat. Rick's team had no plan beyond get inside and cause trouble. They fought their way through corridors filled with machines that could have killed them instantly, but seemed too busy trying to understand human motivations to respond effectively. Corporal Parker discovered that his standard military explosives could damage Devourer systems in ways that the most advanced alien weapons could not. The machines had been designed to resist energy beams and projectile weapons, but they had no defenses against something as simple as chemical explosives placed in the right locations. The turning point came when the Devourer Prime Mind, the central intelligence that controlled the entire invasion, attempted to process the totality of human resistance. It tried to create a mathematical model that would explain why beings would continue fighting long after logic dictated that surrender was the only rational choice. The Prime Mind analyzed thousands of years of human history, studying every battle where humans had fought against impossible odds. It examined cases where outnumbered forces had chosen death over defeat, where individuals had sacrificed themselves for causes that seemed hopeless, where entire civilizations had refused to surrender, even when facing extinction. Admiral Morrison watched from his command ship as something unprecedented happened across the Devourer fleet. The ancient machines began shutting down their offensive systems as they devoted more processing power to the impossible task of understanding human determination. Their perfect formations dissolved into confusion. The computational cascade that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Devourer network, faced with a species that would literally fight until the heat death of the universe rather than submit, experienced something that their creators had never programmed them to handle. They encountered despair. For the first time in their million-year existence, the Devourers realized there was something in the universe they could not overcome, adapt to, or understand. Human willpower was not based on logic or calculation. It came from something deeper than consciousness itself, something that could not be modeled or predicted. The Prime Mind's final transmission spread across the Devourer network at light speed. The message was simple and devastating to machines, built on the assumption that everything could be understood through sufficient analysis. The transmission contained just two words that no computer could process: impossible beings. One by one, Devourer units throughout the solar system began powering down their weapons and engines. The ancient machines that had consumed star systems and defeated the greatest civilizations in the galaxy simply stopped fighting. They could not continue a war against opponents who refused to acknowledge that defeat was possible. Kate Robinson ordered the human fleet to hold their fire as the Devourer armada drifted powerless through space. The ancient machines were not destroyed, but they were no longer a threat. They had been defeated by something they could never understand or counter: the simple human refusal to give up. Rick Hayes and his boarding team found themselves alone on the Devourer construction ship as its systems shut down around them. The machines that had been trying to kill them moments before now stood motionless, their processing systems overwhelmed by paradoxes they could not resolve. In the aftermath of the battle, representatives from every surviving civilization gathered on Earth to witness something that had never happened before in galactic history. The Dominion Council formally dissolved itself and reconstituted as the Galactic Alliance, with humanity as its founding member and protector. Admiral Morrison stood before the assembled delegates and explained the new reality that the war had revealed. Physical strength, intellectual capacity, and technological advancement were still valuable, but they meant nothing without the will to use them. The strongest weapon in the universe was not a gun or a bomb, but the simple determination to never surrender. The Devourers remained in their disabled state, floating monuments to the power of human stubbornness. Scientists from across the galaxy came to study them, trying to understand how pure willpower had accomplished what the most advanced weapons could not. The ancient machines had been defeated not by superior force but by an opponent who simply refused to lose.